Jurassic Park, years and years later, how does it hold up? Practical effects, visual effects, really cutting edge stuff. Are we just wearing our nostalgia goggles or does it really work? Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Welcome back to AsArt with Nick and John. Today we're going to talk about Jurassic Park. By the way, we've done other cool VFX reviews from Parasite all the way up to new shows that are on HBO Max. And
from Parasite to Twilight.
Twilight's not out yet, but it's going to be coming out next week.
It's coming out.
And I mean, even stuff like Wonder Woman 1984, we had so much fun talking about that one too.
Yeah.
And now we're going to talk about one of our favorites, Jurassic Park. It's a classic.
Yes.
So much technology was used and experimented with, which paved the way to a lot of modern movies we have now. Really, like, without Jurassic Park, it would have been another movie. But without Jurassic Park, we probably wouldn't have been where we are now.
Well, it's really cool. Some of my favorite making ofs are from the early 90s, late 80s, where you had Willow, Terminator 2, things like that were really big stepping stones in technology, but they all kind of led up to Jurassic Park. And this is where you're getting really ultra realistic creatures that hold up, very, very well. And that, I think a lot of people consider that kind of the golden age transition period from the golden age of special effects going into the dawn of digital effects and really seeing what the possibilities are there.
Yeah, but this is a good blend between the two for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a perfect, it's like the perfect blend, I feel like.
Yes,
and just so we know, I'm throwing it out there now, the budget was $63 million. Mm-hmm. And this was back in what, 1995? 93?
95, I think. Maybe 96. 95, I think.
93.
Probably, though, yes. Wow, that's further back than I remembered. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, like all the way to 1993, like with the effects. Like this is... Yeah. That's not a bad price point, actually. That's probably pretty pricey back in 1993.
Well, this is back when Industrial Light and Magic was basically the only shop in town that consistently did visual effects work. You had other people that would go and do so. This is before we got Weta, and had Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. So the cool thing about that time period, like I love the visual effects industry where it's at now. You're getting a lot more of it and more people have access to it and can do it. But at the same time, the cool thing about ILM at the time, and they've said this in documentaries and books and stuff, is that's a time period where they could charge what they felt was fair for the work. They weren't charging enormous amounts, but they also could say, you know what, this is a fair amount for the amount of work we're doing, the amount of time we're going to be spending on it. And so they were able to budget accordingly. So maybe it would be, if you had other shops back in the time, maybe they would be getting in bidding wars for the work. But at the time, ILM kind of ruled the roost.
Yeah. And it was cool too, because they were paving the way, like experimenting with tons of different stuff. Like, let's just talk about right away the 3D stuff, right? So it looked like originally they were using like a puppet 3D thing that they would move and it would move the model in 3D space, right?
Which is really cool. You don't see that much anymore. So you had all these traditional puppeteers that would do go motion, which was basically stop motion with motion blur. And they did tests with velociraptors and they looked really good. But then all of a sudden, Steven Spielberg and Dennis Muren and Phil Tippett kind of, conceded, yeah, this is the better way to go. And all these people were trained to work with physical, tangible objects. And all of a sudden they had to try and, if you've ever done 3D animation, which I'm not much of a person with that, Nick's, does a lot more of that. It feels like people have said it like the analogy I saw in some visual effects breakdowns. It's like, it's trying to, type with thick, kitchen gloves on. It's like it feels clunky and it doesn't feel natural. So
especially back then.
Exactly, especially back then. So to bridge that gap, they had a physical puppet that held all kinds of sensors. And if you moved it, it would translate the dinosaur in 3D. And you don't really get that anymore. Now animators just kind of work with a mouse and keyboard and do it by hand. Yep. And I kind of wish we had more of this, but obviously it has to be a very special thing to what you're working with.
Yeah. But I mean, back then though, like even like Toy Story, they were like, you would move stuff and pray like it worked when you like, you know what I mean? Because like you didn't have the processing power now. There's even a cool behind the scenes where they have all the computers on the ground. Like you think like Industrial Light and Magic, like they had it all set up. It's like, no, this is just like all on the ground. You had like different desktops. And it reminded me of a project I worked on where like we had to get desktops to do batch rendering. And it was just like all over the place to get this show done for Nickelodeon or whatever. And it was just like the most like ghetto, awkward like setup. And there was some shady stuff happening at that studio anyways. But like,
but even at really big visual effects studios, it's still a all for one for all. If you step away from your machine for 20 minutes, it automatically kicks in as a render node, meaning that it's going to start rendering all the shots that are in queue, trying to get them done. And when you come back from a break, you have to see, hey, is my computer ready to be used, or do I need to cancel the shot that it's working on? It's still, even now, it's extremely time consuming. I forgot, Pixar has one of the biggest render farms in the world, because on a daily basis, they're 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're just churning out shots. Even if people aren't there, their machines are still rendering. And it's just a crazy, if you guys have never looked up like render farms, it's a crazy amount of cooling, electrical needs. And then, I mean, it's crazy. When I was working at Rhythm and Hues, they called it stage 1, stage 2, just be these big, floors of people. And I got put in the overflow building, which was great because we had nice space, air conditioned. I mean, you'd be walking through Rhythm and Hues and you would just smell BO because people were all, next to each other working overtime hours.
Too and everything, right? They had pets and everything. So they had the smell of animals sweating and
it was insane. But at the same time, it's like you need a lot of people working on this stuff. You need the computers working when people aren't there. So it's just always hot. And it's like, it's an interesting world that
when I was at DreamWorks, it was somewhere else. It wasn't by like the animators and stuff. But anyways, one thing I thought was cool too. So reference. So they did a lot of like reference for the animation, right? Where they were like acting as dinosaurs and like,
those videos are so fun.
And I remember because like they had special places at DreamWorks for the animators to do reference work. And they they even had mirrors. So if they needed to go up or go into a special room and record themselves going like, skadoosh or whatever, you can go in and you can do it and stuff. And it just reminded me of that. I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then one of the cool techniques I learned from an animator at DreamWorks was to watch your stuff backwards. And it was so cool.
Oh, they talk about that in Jurassic Park making ups too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a clip where he always watches his animations backwards because you can see the mistakes. You can see if it's like a little glitchy and stuff. And that was just a technique.
So basically you'd see the T-Rex doing the moonwalk. You're like, whoa.
But that's the best way to see if you have like a glitch or a pop in your cycles and stuff like that. So anyways, I just thought that I just wanted to throw that out there before I totally forgot about the reference of them jumping over like whatever trash cans are like.
That's like my favorite one. Fell. Like the last guy that's lagging behind, he on purpose trips over the makeshift log. He just it's hilarious. But you know what? And I remember they were talking about they made zoo trips specifically just to go watch the animals. If they were talking about a triceratops, they'd get reference of what a rhino looked like running and hitting into the side of it. Yeah. So they did a lot of really cool reference, which is super important when you're trying to depict things as natural. Yeah, really, really cool stuff.
Yeah. And then one thing that I thought was super cool too. So it's already enough, right? Like adding in a dinosaur, and most of the shots are pretty still and stuff, so it's not like too crazy with the camera work. He's like, I kind of want to run with the actors, guys. And they're like, oh, why? Like, why you want to do this, Steven?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So you can have great visual effect shots that are just static shots. The camera's locked off. It's not moving. Maybe you add like a little post move afterwards, but it's not a real physically moving camera. But when you do physically move the camera, it does become almost magical because you start to get this feeling of like, wow, the camera's moving and they're moving at the same time. It adds a lot to the shots, but it makes them exponentially more difficult. So now you need to get in the realm of 3D match moving where you're physically in the software able to figure out how the camera's moving, what type of lens was on there, if they did like a pull focus, how that... It can be extremely difficult. Mm-hmm. I'm actually surprised there's not more camera rigs out there that automatically record all that information. You're starting to get into this stuff with virtual production like the Mandalorian stuff where it is tracking that stuff live and you are getting that. Yeah. But this is, 2021, 2020, very recent stuff.
Did they put golf balls on, baseballs on the ground or golf balls on the ground?
They did. I think they put I don't think they were ping pong balls, but they were bigger. But yeah, especially when the Gallimimus herd was running by and they actually had all that stuff on the ground. It's really cool. If you guys have not seen the behind the scenes making ofs, if you have access to the DVD version or Blu-ray, they have all that stuff on there. It's really, really fun to view that stuff.
It is.
I assume because they probably had a good idea this was going to be a huge, big, groundbreaking film. It seems like they actually took the time to document all the stuff, which is, really neat.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to talk about, there's a scene where I think they're in the roof, right? And then it breaks and then the girl falls over.
Yeah.
And then the raptor cool jumps up and stuff. So they love the shot and they had the shot going, but they're like, oh, you can clearly see it's the stunt double. Like, what are we gonna do?
Because she kind of loses her grip and she looks up just for a second, just a few frames, and they're like, well, shoot, that's clearly not our actress. Yeah, so go ahead.
Well, it was so cool how they replaced the face, because at that time, I don't know if that would be even considered like easy to do at that time, especially like a motion shot like that, right?
I mean, it's not many frames, but you have that perspective shifting, and it probably was tricky to do. And they talk about it wasn't long. It wasn't like it ruined the shot, but it was a challenge enough that, hey, we like this take. We like what was happening. You know, if you start to fall, you do look up like where you're like, oh no, I need to get my grip. So it makes sense acting wise that she would look up. But so it's cool. They had to actually go frame by frame and line up the face of the actual actress and kind of just, I guess you could say, superimpose. In Photoshop, it's not difficult to do, you know, if you have any background with image manipulation. But for video, you kind of have to worry about the movement. I wonder if they had the girl come in, the actual actress, and move.
Oh, they had to. They probably had to do some kind of photo reference.
Try and match it. Yeah.
I would.
But it totally worked.
So, but yeah, it looked.
I would have never thought about it unless they didn't have it in behind the scenes.
Right?
So it works fine.
Grain and blur.
Grain and blur. And there was a lot of blur because, like, you know,
fixes a lot of shots. Grain and blur. Well, it used to. Now everything's so crisp. I don't know.
Yeah.
And
that blur.
They did such a good job with the T-Rex. I mean, all the dinosaurs in 3D, it's amazing how well they hold up. It's to the point where sometimes you don't know if it's the animatronic or the 3D dinosaur. Like, it's so good. Like, obviously, like, you know, sometimes like with the movement of the animatronic, it's more robotic than the 3D one sometimes, which is so funny.
Do you know, I mean, this is early on in hardcore CG stuff. Do you think they actually did the maquette, the actual sculpted from clay version, and then scan that in? Do you think they had high-end 3D scanning at the time, or that the software could even support that?
Oh, I don't know, but they might,
because typically
used, like, as a photo reference, though, they might have did the whole thing and take photos for the mapping and stuff.
Because on Lord of the Rings, you know, they showed in a lot of the behind the scenes where you see the final sculpt of Gollum that the guy physically did, and then they would 3D scan that. Same thing with Treebeard. They would make that and they would scan it in and then do it from there. Sometimes they would model it from scratch in there with photo reference, but if you want that much, I mean, because those dinosaurs, the CG ones, hold up really, really well. Yeah. And I'm curious how they got all the detail in there, because a lot of the tricks that we have now, you still use tricks when you can, but they didn't have a lot of that back then. So I'm curious what their process was.
They had different
to
tricks.
Matching. Well, the big thing is, you know, the puppets or the animatronics did match perfectly to what was done on the computer. And typically, you know, a nice way to do that is you directly insert one in the other, and 3D scanning would be how they do that now. Photogrammetry now a lot of times too. True. But back then I don't think they had that.
There's probably something similar like that. There had to be something similar like that. Or they had the 3D reference for when they sculpted the puppets and stuff, and that's like how they went off of it. So it's like close to camera ready. But one of the shots, it's so great, and it's so ahead of its time, of when the T-Rex eats the lawyer off the toilet, right? And they did the classic, you switch to a 3D model, right? You know, the scene. And we and John talk about Lord of the Rings a lot on this channel. And one of our favorite ones is when Sam rolls down the back of the spider. Shelob. He's 3D, but then he rolls in, and it's like a perfect blend of him rolling towards the camera, the actor.
Yeah.
And it's obviously the opposite of that, but it's done so good.
Yeah. It's done so well, you can't tell. And the cool thing is the artists that work on these shots, they start to say, like, after a while, but we actually have a hard time trying to figure out where one element leaves off and the other one picks up, because it's so seamless at that point. And that's the ultimate goal, and it obviously helps when they're in motion, but gosh, how hard is it to do that, to light it and texture it the exact same way to where it's good. And, you know, they will transition and do like a fade over like 2 or 3 frames. But again, that's a fraction of a second. And typically, if you just cut from one thing to another, it's really easy to tell. And man, it totally worked in that with that lure though. Yeah. One of the funnest jokes / scary parts of the film, really.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I know.
Like, what's the worst way to go? I don't know. You could get eaten, but get eaten while you're on the toilet, that's not a good way to go.
Yeah. His career was flushed from there. Let's just say the lawyer's
great. Great. Jungle Cruise dad jokes coming out of Nick's mouth.
And then we got to give it up to Steven Spielberg, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Because he framed these shots and he directed the actors enough where by just the acting alone, we believe the dinosaurs are real. Like most of the shots where you believe the dinosaurs are real is like the close-ups of the eyes, and they're just like, whoa, I'm seeing a dinosaur for the first time. And it's the framing. Because think about it, he was envisioning this, and especially the last sequence, because they just totally like, let's just do this instead. Let's have like the T-Rex come in and like, let's have, it was all kind of like last minute, like, oh crap, he's adding more kind of thing. But like he sent it to them camera ready. So it was like good to go in theaters, even if the dinosaurs weren't in there. You know what I mean? Like everything was like how he wanted it to be. And it's just, you can tell with this movie, it works. And gosh, it looks so good too. It looks so good.
I mean, you have to give a lot of credit to the visual effects people at the time. Dennis Muren was one of the main guys at Industrial Light and Magic at the time. I don't know if he was like heading up the whole company at the point. He later on in his career would. I think he just recently retired, and now John Knoll, who's been there forever, one of the creators of Photoshop, he and his brother. Dennis Muren, was the one who suggested to Steven Spielberg, say, hey, I think we can do this computer. I think we can go beyond Go Motion. And that's got to be scary. You don't hear him really talk about that, or you hear them talking about it, but they talk about it confidently. But at the same time, you have to think, gosh, they hadn't done a test. It was just a hunch. I think we can do this. And then, he did say, like, show me, I'm not just going to take your word for it. But at the same time, when you go to one of the biggest directors in the world and say, hey, I think I've got a better way of doing this, that we can get better shots. And he's like, all right, you definitely want to be able to deliver,
That's
so
crazy.
A lot of credit to them as well, and a lot of credit to Phil Tippett and his crew, who did typically the traditional puppeteering. They were able to make that shift. You hear a lot of stories in the visual effects industry when digital compositing or anything digital started to take over. A lot of people were very resistant, and they would be unwilling to even admit that the digital versions had the potential to look better or more efficient. They said, nope, I like this way. And so a lot of people, I talked to some, like my old instructors, like some people weren't able to make the transition. They just got out of the industry. They were unwilling to make that shift. But then the ones that did really got to enjoy.
Later on, though.
As far as
like careers and job wise.
Oh yeah, I mean, once the shift happened, you're basically out of a job unless you find the remnants of that shop, still going on. I mean, clearly you still need traditional special effects. I mean, Tippett Studios, even though he's not around anymore, is still going strong. I mean, you have those type of things.
And we got to talk about the animatronics, like really, really briefly. Obviously, this is more VFX, but fantastic animatronics, and sometimes puppets, maybe with the, I don't know if they were puppets or if they were all animatronics, but the T-Rex in that whole water sequence looked amazing. Even when it wasn't even through the lens that we're watching, and you just see it like moving around and resetting and stuff. It's so freaking cool. Like how cool was that? Like they built something that scale, and just that's
the interesting part about this that I will say very much favors older films, and maybe why even the newer Jurassic Park movies don't have that sense of grounded realism as much as the older ones, is that at the time, to get that, not handful, there was more than a handful of shots, but those specific CG shots they had for Jurassic Park, one, they weren't even completely sure if they could do it early on. But even when they did, they knew they had a very limited ability to do those shots. And so they had to they had to do a hybrid approach with the animatronics. I feel like now it takes a lot of space. There's more things that can go wrong with physically, electronic things. I feel like now they wouldn't even try and do animatronic. And the problem with that is, you know what? There is some believability to something that's really physically living in the world that you're trying to depict. You can hit it with real lights. It's in there with the actors and actresses. I don't think they try to do that anymore. I don't think they do.
They tried with the new Star Wars, right? With like the robots and like characters and costumes and stuff like that. They try to bring it back with the new Star Wars movies, I feel like.
They used more traditional effects than they had been using, but I still feel like there's a lot.
It's not to the scale, but like the idea of bringing back like heavy costumes instead of like full 3D characters, like they're starting to bring back that more. But I think it's more for nostalgia purposes than like for aesthetics maybe. I don't know though. That's another topic for other video. John, wrap us up for this Jurassic Park adventure. Get us off the island with the helicopter.
But the cool thing about Jurassic Park is, whether it was budget or technology constraints, they did ride this line and have that hybrid, and I think that's why it holds up so well. So let us know down below, do you guys think so many years later that Jurassic Park still holds up, or are you feeling like you're starting to see the kinks in the armor and you're starting to see that it's not holding its age? If you think of current movies that you think do a better job than Jurassic Park. They're trying to depict extinct or fantasy creatures that looks as believable. We'd love to hear those as well.
Don't love say to see Ice Age.
Check out AsArt.space with the audio and video links. We have audio podcasts, video episodes. Nick is laughing. We'll see you on the next AsArt.